Epithelial tissues are found in the skin and in the lining of body cavities. We can divide epithelial tissues up two ways, by the number of layers and by the shape of the cell. So if they're flat, like a plate or like your cell phone, we call that squamous. So squamous are flat, like a CD, right? If they're simple squamous, there's just one layer. So simple is one layer, stratified is multiple layers. So we can have simple squamous and stratified squamous. So here we have our simple squamous, one layer of thin flat cells. We find that, for example, in the lungs, and that allows for fast diffusion of oxygen and carbon dioxide. So that's very thin, allows for absorption and diffusion of oxygen, carbon dioxide. Stratified we have in layers. So we have stratified squamous where we have some areas of abrasion, for example, in our mouth, in our cells in the lining the mouth, in our cheeks. Those are stratified squamous. So as we're eating, maybe we're eating nuts, there's some scraping and everything. It's no problem. Some of those cells come off, but we're not damaged by it. Then we can have cuboidal. So cuboidal are more or less in the shape of a cube, right? Like a child's block. And that again, it can be simple, one layer, or it can be in several layers. So we've got simple cuboidal and stratified cuboidal. So stratified means the layers, right? So simple cuboidal we would find in the kidneys, where we're having again some absorption and excretion. Columnar is like a column, right? So that's a column, right? My little battery box there is a column or columnar. And again, we can have simple, which is one layer. We're going to find that in the digestive system. We can have multiple layers, which is stratified. And then we have something called pseudostratified, which is actually one layer but appears to be more than one layer. And that's because these nuclei are at different levels, and so under the microscope it looks like there's more layers, but there's not. And we find that in the windpipe or the trachea. So there we have ciliated pseudostratified columnar cells. We'll look at that again when we get to the respiratory system. So remember that we've got stratified, which is layers, and we've got simple, which is one layer. We've got squamous, which is flat, cuboidal, which is like a cube, and columnar, which is like a column or a rectangle. A goblet cell is an example of a columnar epithelial cell. We find these in the small intestine, and they're going to secrete some mucus, allow that food to move through. So there we see it with the arrow. We've got the goblet cells, and then next to them we have some columnar cells that will be absorbing nutrients. Epithelial tissues include the simple squamous epithelium. That's one layer of flat cells. We find that in the lungs and in the capillaries, and it allows for rapid diffusion of gases, carbon dioxide, and oxygen. We have the simple cuboidal epithelium, one layer of cuboidal or square-shaped cells. We can find this in the kidneys and also allows for absorption of materials in the kidneys. Simple columnar epithelium often also has microvilli, and this can be found in the digestive tract, especially the small intestine, where it absorbs nutrients from the food. Pseudostratified columnar epithelium often has cilia, which are different than microvilli. They may look a little same, but keep cilia and microvilli straight. Cilia are going to have a movement, so cilia will take the mucus and debris and move it out of the windpipe, out of the trachea, so we can cough it out, where the microvilli are involved with absorption. The microvilli are increasing surface area so that we can absorb, but the cilia are moving like people in a mosh pit, right? Moving the mucus out. Stratified squamous epithelium is found in the mouth and in the vagina in areas subjected to friction. The stratified cuboidal is in places where we need protection. The stratified columnar are found in the male reproductive system. And then we have transitional epithelium, which will allow for stretching, and this is found in the urinary bladder. The integumentary system is the skin. The skin is the largest organ in the body and is made of epithelial cells, predominantly stratified squamous epithelial cells. So layers of cells on the outside, they're dead. That's why we can scratch a little bit and not be hurt. So we have the epidermis, epi meaning outer, and that's the epidermis. Dermis is skin, and that's the very outer layer of dead skin. Then we have the dermis, which includes living tissue. We see a sweat gland, an eccrine sweat gland. We see a hair follicle. We see the erector pili muscle. We see a sebaceous gland, which produces oil. We see the hair follicle. We see some nerves represented by these yellow lines. We see capillaries, shown in blue and red for the arterioles and venules. And we see a Pacinian corpuscle. This is going to detect pressure. And then in the hypodermis, hypo meaning lower, so below the dermis we have the hypodermis, and that's going to include some adipose tissue. All right. The eccrine or sweat gland is eccrine sweat gland is the type that's on most of our skin that produces a watery sweat that is to reduce the body temperature. The function of the eccrine sweat gland is to reduce the body temperature. The hair follicle is fairly distinctive in the light micrograph, right? It looks kind of like a little spear. And remember, this light micrograph, they've sliced through tissue, so we're just seeing a fine plane through the hair follicle. The sebaceous glands put the oil into that hair follicle, and that's why our hair gets greasy. There's the hair, and there's the follicle. You see a little blood supply, and this is the erector pili muscle. This is what will cause that hair to stand on end. And these oils are natural. They lubricate and protect the skin. All right, there's a closer look at the hair follicles. And we have the outer sheath, inner sheath. There's the sebaceous gland, right, and the hair shaft. Here we can see the dermal papillae between those layers. There we see a nice sebaceous gland. This is why it's good to look at both the light micrograph and your illustration and compare them. If we were just looking at this, it wouldn't make any sense at all. But if we compare this to our cartoon or the artist concept, we can see, okay, yeah, these are the sebaceous glands. There's the hair shaft. There's the hair follicle. Thick skin versus thin skin. Thin skin versus thick skin. We have thick skin on the palm of our hand, on the soles of our feet, particularly the heels of our feet. And here we have many, many layers of that stratified squamous. And of course, thin skin will be here. We don't have as many layers. The epidermis has many layers of cells, multiple layers of cells. Basal layer is farther down and consists of cuboidal cells, whereas the outer layer is squamous cells in many layers, and these are keratinized. Keratin is a protein that is found throughout the animal kingdom, and keratin is in our nails, in our hair, it's in our skin, it's also in the scales on a snake, the feathers on a bird, the horns on some quadruped animals, and it makes our skin more waterproof and provides some protection, but makes it waterproof. In this illustration, we see thick skin with 5 layers, and if we start here at the bottom, we have stratum basale, basal layer, stratum spinosum, or spiny layer, that's an artifact, or we see the spines on those cells just due to the preparation. Stratum granulosum, right here. Stratum lucidum, which is a clear layer only found in thick skin, and stratum corneum, or that horny outer layer. We can remember these by come, let's get sunburned for corneum, lucidum, granulosum, spinosum, and basale. There we've got a melanocyte that produces melanin, which is the pigment in our skin. And there is our dermis, or living tissue, underneath. There's a Merkel cell that will detect pressure. Here we can see the dermal papillae, this little things that are sticking up. We can see a Messner's corpuscle, which will detect touch. Here we can see the many layers, right? So the dermal papillae are adjacent to the basement membrane, which is underneath, and the stratum basale, which is over the top of that layer. Here again, we're looking at layers of the dermis. We see the papillary layer, right, that's kind of interlinking, and we have fibers of collagen extending from one to the other. That's why collagen helps to retain the firmness of our skin. And these dermal papillae extend into the epidermis. The dense collagen fibers belong to the reticular layer. So there's the papillae, there's our reticular layer. So coloration of skin depends on several things. The first is the melanin, which is a pigment produced to protect our bodies from ultraviolet light, from the sunlight. And the more of this we have, the darker our skin is. Now, a person may have dark skin and be somewhat protected from skin cancer, but still vulnerable under the nails, the fingernails, and the toenails when exposed to the skin. Other factors affecting skin color are carotenoids that are produced in our skin that kind of give a pinkish or orangish look, and the blood vessels underneath, right, can give a bluish or reddish tone. The nail is part of the integumentary system. We have the nail root, which is underneath the skin. We can't see the nail root when we're looking at our hands. The proximal nail fold is that right over that nail. Eponychium is what we call the cuticle, that little bit right where we can first begin to see the nail. The nail is, of course, growing out. The luna is that little bit of white that looks like a little sliver of moon that is just visible. The nail body, of course, is the nail itself. Hyponychium is right under the nail where it leaves our finger, also called the quick, and of course that hurts a lot if we get hurt there. There's our bone, our finger bone. There's just dermis and epidermis. So that's an accessory structure of the integumentary system. We'll talk more about accessory structures in the digestive and reproductive systems. So one function of the skin is to provide thermoregulation, to either retain heat or let heat be lost, right? So when we're producing heat because we're exercising, we're going to allow that heat to dissipate, and sweat will also, of course, assist with that. Skin does show changes over time, and that will show on the places that are exposed most to the sun. So on our faces and our hands, That's why I started wearing gardening gloves when I was out gardening, because I noticed that people's hands will really show the age, and so gardening gloves help with that a lot. Moles can become cancerous if a mole changes, if it gets bigger, if it comes up from the surface of the skin, if it changes color, changes shape. You need to go to the doctor and have it checked. If it is dark like this, that is particularly concerning. This one is raised and not very attractive, but shouldn't be causing any trouble. Basal cell carcinomas are very common. They're not as dark. They do need to be treated. They do need to be removed, but they are very common and they are not as likely to become metastasized. They do need to be treated. They often occur on the end of the nose. Squamous cell also can occur on the end of someone's nose. These are somewhat more concerning, do need to be taken care of. There's another example of a squamous cell carcinoma. And you can see the irregular shape, right? That this is not just round or oval, it's got an irregular shape.